Good morning, and thank you for being here for the Freight Transportation Panel discussion. My name is Bob Bradshaw. I'm the chairman for the East Harris County Manufacturers Association. And I have the privilege to introduce our panelists and moderator for this discussion. We do have one change in our panelist lineup. Judge Emmett was unable to make it this morning, but I still think we have a very powerful group up here of subject matter experts. Our first panelist is U.S. Congressman Randy Weber, representing the 14th District of Texas. Congressman Weber currently holds a key leadership role on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, serving as the chairman of the Energy Subcommittee. He is also a newly appointed member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he serves on the following subcommittees: Water Resources and Environment, Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation, as well as Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials. Prior to being elected to Congress, Congressman Weber served 4 years in the Texas State House. During his tenure, he served on the committees of Environmental Regulation, Public Education, and as Vice Chair of Border and Intergovernmental Affairs. Congressman has lived in a 20-mile radius for all his life and has been married to Brenda Weber, a retired school teacher, for over 40 years. He is a graduate of Alvin Community College and holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Houston at Clear Lake. Thank you, Congressman, for being here. Next, let me introduce Caroline Mays. Ms. Mays is the Director of Freight and International Trade Section for the Texas Department of Transportation. She is charged with developing and managing TxDOT's multimodal freight and international trade and border programs, including developing and carrying out a strategic vision for TxDOT's activities for addressing freight and international trade transportation issues to facilitate Texas economic development and competitiveness. Developing and maintaining the Texas Border Transportation Master Plan, overseeing the Texas Freight Advisory Committee and the Border Trade Advisory Committee, and coordinating with internal and external stakeholders. She has been instrumental in the development of the state's first multimodal Texas Freight Mobility Plan. Prior to joining TxDOT in November 2012, Ms. Mays worked for the Atlanta Regional Commission in Georgia, where she managed the Freight Transportation and Intelligent Transportation Systems planning programs. She was instrumental in creating the MPO's Freight Advisory Committee. Most notably, she managed the development of an award-winning Atlanta Regional Freight Mobility Plan. Ms. Mays is a member of the American Planning Association and the American Institute of Certified Planners. She chairs the TRB's Agricultural Transportation Committee and is a member of the Intermodal Freight Committee. She received her bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Waterloo, Canada, and a master's degree of science in planning from the University of Toronto, Canada. Our third panelist is also from TxDOT. Let me introduce Mr. William Bill Brudnick, Director, Transportation Planning and Development for the Texas Department of Transportation, Houston District. Bill started his career in 1986 as an engineering assistant in Austin at the Highway Design Division, where he reviewed plan specifications and estimates across the state. In 1987, he moved back home to Houston and worked in various offices throughout the Houston District. In July 2014, he became the Director of Transportation, Planning and Development, Houston District. In his current position, Bill oversees all advanced planning, programs, project development, and design activities for the Houston District. Bill received his degree in civil engineering from Texas A&M University in 1986. He and his wife, Angela, have 3 children. The fourth member of our panel is Scott Campbell. Scott manages the America's Customer Fulfillment Organization for LyondellBasell, the world's 3rd largest chemical company. Scott has been with LyondellBasell and his predecessor company since 1994. Over his career, he's held various positions in logistics planning, logistics operations, logistics commercial, customer fulfillment management, and business finance. In addition to his responsibilities at LyondellBasell, Scott is the chairman of the East Harris County Manufacturers Association's Logistics and Transportation Committee. He received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from West Virginia University and his MBA in Logistics and Transportation from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Please join me in welcoming our 4 panelists. Moderating this panel will be Natalie Picha. Natalie was elected to the Seabrook City Council in May of this year. She has served on the city's Charter Review Commission, Economic Development Corporation, and Civil Service Commission. She is a senior financial advisor, vice president with the Royal Group at Merrill Lynch. She has over 25 years of experience in strategic business development and 10 years in the transportation industry. She is the Associate Vice Chair for the Associated General Contractors of Texas and board member for the Bay Area Transportation Partnership. Natalie and her husband, Daryl, have 3 daughters, which they proudly raised in Seabrook. Natalie?
Thank you so much, Bob. And yes, let's give another round of applause for all of our panelists this morning. I just want to say thank you so much. It is an honor to have the opportunity to chair such a distinguished panel and to have the kind of experience and depth of knowledge that we have here. This morning's conversation is really going to focus on the increased shipping containers, port infrastructure, and road capacity. How are we going to handle this going into the future? How are we going to address the issue of the increased freight? We've got expansion in the chemical industry, increased imports to Houston via the Panama Canal, and then how do we protect these assets and this infrastructure going on into the future? So this morning, I would like to start with Scott because we want to hear an industry viewpoint on where we're going in terms of the increase in resin production and what we can expect to hit the local roads over the next 5 years.
Okay. So from a LyondellBasell perspective, we announced in May the groundbreaking of our LaPorte plant here locally, which will be a 1.1 billion pound a year polyethylene plant with a startup of 2019. But as an industry, we are forecasting that we'll spend about $50 billion of investment in the Gulf Coast side of things. There are 4 companies that have planned startups this year with up to 14 projects by 2019. So what that translates into from our perspective is roughly 500,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, or about 450 trucks per day on the local roads.
So this is an increase.
An increase over what we see today.
Increase over. Do you happen to know a percentage? Kind of give us an idea. Is that double, triple?
I do not know the percentage.
But it's something,
yes.
It's a lot.
It's significant.
It's a significant increase.
Yes.
Okay. How do the logistics and moving those products to the Port of Houston affect our global competitive position?
So the business that we operate in is a commodity business. Okay, at the end of the day, feedstocks, production costs, and logistics all have an impact on how we operate as a global company. And we understand that there are challenges that exist for all of us. I mean, the logistics side of things, we're looking at being able to load our containers fully. Is the right infrastructure in place? Do we have the right hours of operations? And there's a group through EHCMA and through other local bodies that are working towards trying to address some of those concerns. I mean, we worked through legislative options. We've worked with TxDOT and this organization, the Economic Alliance, as well as HGAC and many of the other regional planning organizations to make sure that we do that, and then also directly with our vendors, suppliers, as well as the Port of Houston directly. But there are also challenges for us. I mean, the competitiveness is important. I mean, we talk about cents per pound. We're talking half a cent, a penny, for every product that we make changes decisions in our business. Okay, and so we look to things that Harvey's really kind of created a challenge for us because there's now potentially some risk mitigation options that we have to think about, contingency planning and things like that, as well as other people want to get involved in this. Okay, and so I mean, from the very beginning, there's been discussions about East and West Coast ports challenging for the Port of Houston business, as well as options through Dallas-Fort Worth and other parts of the country. So competitiveness is important. We have entire teams that look at this to make sure that we are in the best pace for our businesses and where we intend to go with our products.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So I think that's a really good way to frame the rest of the conversation. You can hear the challenge that we are faced with. So, Congressman, as home to the nation's largest petrochemical complex, one that produces more than 25% of this nation's fuel, where we saw recently an effect on prices when production was interrupted, shouldn't the Houston Port region and its infrastructure be prioritized as critical for this nation's security, global economic viability through the storm surge and coastal barrier protection? Can you speak to that?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Thank you, Natalie. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, I often, when I speak, well, let me back up. I have 5 ports in my district, more than any other member of Congress. Some have 4, but I have the first 3 coastal counties coming from Louisiana. Jefferson County, Galveston County, and then the southern half of Brazoria County. Port of Houston is not one of my 5 ports. It actually comes up through Galveston Bay. When I speak about how energy-rich, job-rich, and how important our area is to the economy of the United States. I often tell people that the things that make America great are the things that America makes. You're talking about some more, Scott, and so we've got to make sure that as a job-creating area that we highlight that. I've been singing that same tune. I've been in Congress 4.5 years now, for about the last 4.5 years, highlighting our region, how great it is. We dodged a bullet with Hurricane Ike on September the 13th, 2008. Harvey, not so lucky. My 3 counties arguably are ground zero for Harvey flooding. Corpus Christi got all the wind, we got most of the water. And so it shows that with the increase in fuel prices around the country, which the country experienced in Hurricane Ike, I wasn't in Congress in 2008, but they're aware of how important this district is because fuel prices spiked. We've got to protect this region because not only are there 6 million people here, which represents families and homes and lifestyles, but there are also jobs. Our workforce has been hurt from Hurricane Harvey, big time. And you know, some of you probably know over 500,000 cars are flooded, over 100,000 homes are destroyed. So this is a very, very, very important part of the community and part of the country. Now, I've been to Netherlands and seen the coastal barrier protection there. I get that this was a rain event coming down from the sky. You can't it's hard to prevent against that, but from a coastal tidal surge, we can protect this area. 60% of the Netherlands is below sea level. They can hold back the sea. We can too. We're hoping to get this project done, which is priced at about $12 to $15 billion. We've been talking to I personally have been over to the White House and seen Mick Mulvaney, the Office of Management and Budget, and said, look, we want the president to get this in his, on his plan, if you will. Mick said the president knows about it. Unfortunately, right now he wants a 50-50 revenue share, which is a little tough for us. So we're going to come back and make the case for our ports, our waterways, our coastal barrier protection. You all know, I'm telling Noah about the flood here. You all know about how important the Houston port is, the economy. In the United States, all the ports represent 13.3 million jobs, $3.15 trillion of our GDP. That's, folks, that's 1/6 of our economy. Houston is a major, major, major player in that. So you're seeing Congress. I've been talking to the appropriators. I've been talking to Speaker Ryan. It was here last night. He's here today in my district. I've had Kevin McCarthy do a flyover of the district. We've had Senator Cornyn, Senator Cruz do flyovers. We are making the case for how important this district is and how important it is to protect this area. So stay tuned. We're hoping to see a very quick another emergency appropriations bill within a week to 2 weeks, because FEMA is going to run out of money in less than 2 weeks, folks. They're spending $400 million a day. A day. Very, very important, and so we're working hard on that. Thanks for the question.
So do you see FEMA funding coming in for repair, but more importantly, for protection?
Well, absolutely. That's a good way of putting it. Yes, we want to repair the infrastructure that's in place and make sure we bring it whole again. But it's got to be more than that about it. It's got to be, how do we look forward? County Judge Ed Emmett, I think, who was going to be here, has already said that we need to look at this and have a regional drainage cooperative plan, if you will, because we can't stand for this again. A lot of development in the area. And so you're going to see FEMA dollars, I think, come in. But more than that, you're going to see some supplemental appropriations. I hope, in protecting the Gulf Coast, we hope to get it. And we talked about 3 tranches of money. You saw the first one with a $15 billion bill that we put on the floor. And folks, let me tell you, your Texas congressional delegation did something historic 2 weeks ago. There's 36 members of Texas, 25 Republicans and 11 Democrats. We all met and had lunch in the same room, if you can believe that. There wasn't too many fistfights break out. But we all met and had lunch in the same room and talked about how important this was and to get behind it and get this done. We had a second lunch. It was a flyout day. There weren't quite as many as all of us. But you're going to see your Texas delegation go to bat, and I think you're going to see that funding hopefully before that 3rd tranche is let.
That would be fantastic news. That would be very exciting. Thank you, Congressman. I'd kind of like to turn our focus now to the roadway, the traffic, and some solutions in terms of where we're going. We know that we already have congestion, and we've heard now the effects that some of the storm has had, and then, of course, where we're going in terms of production. So, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'd kind of like to turn this conversation now to TxDOT. How do you see our regional economic expansion? Things like the Panama Canal, import-export, population growth, all of those things that are affecting the regional transportation systems. How do you see that working together? Freight mobility, mass transit. When we talk about it, it's truly a big question because there's a lot of variables and there's a lot of facets. But can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, good morning, Natalie, and thank you again for inviting me. I'm not Judge Emmett, but I'm sitting here kind of filling his shoes a little bit, but I appreciate being here. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And Scott and the Congressman have kind of laid, some of the key issues. You have, growth in trade, growth in freight. You have some of the challenges with natural disasters. So in terms of the economy, Houston was built on trade. That was the fundamental, what has, really fueled Houston into what it is today. Congressman talked about the Port of Houston. The Port of Houston is the busiest container port in the U.S. And, it generates economic benefits, as the Congressman talked about, but also it generates, traffic, but also it impacts this region from a very big picture. So the Panama Canal being a huge component of this region, that's going to see tremendous growth. You're already seeing growth in trade coming through the Port of Houston. And actually, the shipping costs are getting lower to come through the Port of Houston compared to going to the West Coast, both for imports and for exports. So you're going to see a lot of things coming through the Port of Houston on both ends, not just imports, but exports. You're going to see, exports going out in energy products. There's LNG, that's now being produced. There's reversing it. Before it used to be coming in, but now there's a lot of development going on that's going to facilitate exports. So you're going to see a lot of that in the Houston region, and it's going to be continuing, one, because of Port of Houston, but also because Houston is one of 3 distribution hubs in the U.S. It's Atlanta, Chicago, and Houston. So when you look at the main distribution hubs in the country, Houston is one of the top ones. So you're going to continue to see that, and a lot of that, again, is fueled by the Port of Houston. So make no mistake, Port of Houston has a big role, not just in this economy, but globally and nationally as well. I wanted to just show a quick slide on the economic impact of Houston when it comes to the roadways. You can just, click it. This shows you a truck leaving the Houston region, where it gets in 7 days. And this is to show the national impact of Houston. that a truck leaving Houston in 7 days can be as far as Canada. So that's the economic impact of this region, what the Port of Houston does. And highlighted I-69, you look at what gets on I-69 is all the way in Canada, in Toronto, where I come from. So, you know, I just wanted to show this side is very quickly to support the point I'm making here is that this region is going to continue to be an economic engine, not just for this state, but for this nation and then for North America.
Thank you. And that slide is pretty shocking to see how far-reaching it is in such a short period of time. So with the challenges in the freight transportation arena, what are the specific challenges that you deal with in your role, and what solutions do you see as achievable from your perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and for Houston, on the transportation side, especially on the highway side, one of the main challenge in the Houston region is congestion on our highway system. You have, literally, Houston is a crossroads. You got east-west traffic, then you got north-south, I-10, I-45, some of the major arteries. But you also have congestion issues on the local arterials. For instance, Port of Houston is not directly on an interstate, so the local roads, your 146, 225, that connects the Port of Houston to the interstate, you got connectivity issues and challenges there. You got your warehousing on the eastern part of the Houston region that, you know, has freight issues and connectivity issues, so you have to deal with those localized congestion issues within the Houston region. Port of Houston, 7,000 trucks a day. And Scott has talked about another 450 trucks a day going to be added to that. And we're not talking about all the other warehousing coming into this region to support the Port of Houston, support the distribution of commodities through this region. So you're going to see more trucks combining with commuter traffic. You talked about transit. A lot of times when we talk about freight, we don't talk about transit. Transit is actually a key component because the folks working at the Port of Houston, working at the warehousing, they need to get there. And not all of them can drive. They need to be able to have access to transit that's reliable. The blue-collar workers need to get to those jobs. So workforce and access is going to continue to be key for this region and going to continue to need to be addressed. Harvey, you know, is a main challenge for this region. And I want to show just, you know, 2 slides to really show the impact of Harvey. This is Houston on August 20th. This is before Harvey hit the roadways in Houston. This is how many trucks were crisscrossing this region. Next slide. This is after Harvey on August 27th. Now you see there are literally no trucks in this region. So I'm just showing you this. This was the impact of Harvey on the freight industry. It lowered the city, the region came to a full stop. Trucks could not get in here. And Congressman, when it comes to supplies, this is the message that you all need to really address. One, not just for this region, but nationally, because the trucks cannot get supplies here to bring water, to bring food, to bring any supplies whatsoever. And that's the first line of defense when you're talking about disaster response, disaster recovery. And one, they couldn't even get truck drivers because most of these truck drivers couldn't get to where they could drive the trucks here. So those are some of the issues that this region faces in terms of the major challenges. And how do you address that? You need a bold plan, a plan that you have to think outside of the box. How do you plan for disasters, which, you know, it's going to occur. This is not the last one this region is going to see.
Right.
So this region needs to really come together, both federal, state, and the local levels. You know, TxDOT will do our part, but at the local level, you know, everybody needs to come together and develop a plan to respond to the disaster issues, but also the congestion. And it has to be multimodal. Again, I'm from TxDOT. Yes, we focus primarily on highways, but highways are not the only thing that moves people and moves goods. It has to be multimodal. You got to look at rail. You got to look at transit. You got to look at buses on our end. You got to look at pipelines. We don't focus on pipelines, but pipelines is what moves energy in this state and across, you know, across the nation. So again, it needs to be bold. It needs to be partners, private sector, bringing the private sector. There's a lot of private sector in here today. They have a role to play. Funding, financing, but also bringing expertise. A lot of times we forget private sector has a lot of expertise that can be brought to the table. So with that, I really just wanted to make sure that you understand that it's a partnership. Even a lot of things we do at TxDOT is a partnership with both private sector and all the other levels of government.
Thank you very much. And I think that you've touched on something there when you say partnership. I think that's what this conference is about. That's what the Economic Alliance, what we have built our successes on in the past. It's about having all the voices at the table. So, Congressman, this kind of reiterates what you mentioned as well. It's having all of the people in the right place to have the conversations, to look for those bold solutions. Next question is for you, Bill. How does TxDOT, if we kind of take this back to roadways, how do you prioritize projects in the state and the region? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Natalie. I guess for starters, just to give you a little overview of how TxDOT operates, TxDOT is broken out into 25 districts, and Houston is one of those districts. Well, the prioritization of our projects are done pretty much at the local level. Actually, they're handled at what we call the Metropolitan Planning Organization. In our case, it'd be the Houston Area Galveston Council, where these projects, the majority of them, are prioritized. So with that being said, that's it's comprised of, I think it's 8 counties. You have Galveston, Brazoria, Fort Bend, Harris, Waller, Montgomery, and also we have Liberty and Chambers counties that all fall under the Houston Galveston Area Council. So in prioritizing these projects, what happens is they set their criterias. They're looking at things such as congestion. They're looking at bottlenecks. They're looking at economic development when they're picking these projects, and they're also looking at the price of the projects. So once the prioritization is made, the projects are actually submitted up to our transportation committee for a lot of these projects, the majority of the funding. And what happens is our commission, if they approve it, then it goes into what we call the Unified Transportation Program. And what that is a 10-year plan of projects. And hopefully then from that point they get constructed, and that's based on funding projections.
Okay, thank you. I think speaking to that, I know from a lot of even industry or just residential perspective, it's always about, well, why couldn't we get it done faster? Can you talk to a little bit about how the state might be able to enhance your ability to address challenges when it comes to bringing those projects or getting them done? I know recently the Transportation Commission has made some changes that have made things a little easier to bring projects shovel-ready a little faster. Can you speak a little bit to some of those challenges or how the state could help?
Okay, well, one thing I'd like to say is, first of all, our main mission is to go ahead and move people and goods. One thing the state has already done is we've come up recently in the last couple of years, we've come up with what they call a statewide freight plan. And what that did, it's a plan that identifies a lot of our priorities. And within that plan, there's also advisory committees that are signed both on a state level and a local level. And what they're doing is they're updating the plans, and from there we're able to go ahead and advance a lot of these projects. Some of these that are freight related, I guess I'll start with SH 146. Recently we were able to get 146 pretty much from Spencer Highway all the way down to 17 FM 17 517. That's funded, and that's in what we call the Unified Transportation Plan. Also, Beltway 8, right there at 225, that interchange, we were able to go ahead and get 4 connectors. We got that partially funded, 4 connectors, and we're also, the other 4, we're looking for infra grants. They were actually turned in on a statewide level for funding for the remainder of those 4 connectors. I-45 from basically going all the way south from the Harris County line to all the way into Galveston. We have that right now currently in our Unified Transportation Plan. And the other thing that we're doing is studies. Studies are important. We're working on the I-69 bypass. Our HGAC is working on some studies there. We got SH 225 from 610 to 146 being studied. So keeping the studies going and keeping the pipeline going is very, very important. And also on the state level, giving us the ability to do detailed plans on unfunded projects. It's very important because a lot of these projects are based on funding projections, and if a project doesn't make it, or you know, we get a little extra funding, then we're able to go ahead and get projects ready and move those forward and get them on the ground. So,
Thank you. That's great information.
Can I just add a little to this point? How can you know, the region be engaged? Bill mentioned the Freight Advisory Committee. Actually, Judge Emmett, who is not able to be here, is the chair for that committee. And actually, Scott sits on that committee. I know Roger Gunther from the Port of Houston and several other, you know, key stakeholders in the region sit on that. And really, that's a way to help prioritize freight-centric projects. In the past, we have been traditionally looking at investments from a passenger perspective. How do we move people? But now that has changed, as Bill mentioned the last few years, is the focus is on moving people and goods, because moving goods creates jobs for the people. Without moving goods, the people don't have jobs. So I just want to make sure that, you know, that I mentioned that. And then on the second level is at the regional level here within the Houston region, the MPO, HGAC, has a regional freight advisory committee. Mm-hmm. And really, I would encourage those of you that are not involved in the regional planning process to get engaged, to get involved, because it makes a difference. Your voices get heard. I can see, you know, from TxDOT, the voices of the freight advisory committee has been heard the last several years. There are changes and policies that are already being made as we speak that impacts how TxDOT makes decisions on investments on some of the key freight corridors, as Bill mentioned.
Thank you. So, and I'll just add to that, the Economic Alliance Transportation Committee in the last year has done a great job of reaching out to stakeholders and sitting down, and we've actually put that prioritized list of projects that we know impact freight in our region, and that has gotten a lot of traction. We've had a lot of support, and having that plan together has made a difference. So how do we get funding? How do we get more funding for the region, for the projects? Can maybe both you, Caroline, and Bill speak to that?
Well, one thing I would like to say is, you know, TxDOT realizes the importance of moving freight. And I mentioned that plan, you know, the freight plan, and having a plan in place. You know, these advisory committees are helping both on the state level and also on a local level. One thing that the stakeholders can do is make sure that they're get involved with the planning process. That's one thing that is a must. They know their area, they know what needs to be done. So getting involved in the planning process is probably very important. And the other thing I would like to say is, you know, it's a partnership. Again, working with the MPOs, you know, making the importance known of the actual freight movement type projects, the freight routes, being a partnership. I mentioned getting the projects ready, getting them on the shelf. That's something that can be helped out, you know, to advance these projects. And also forums like this, just bringing the importance of y'all's priorities up front. You know, this is a good format to do that.
Thank you. Okay.
And if I can add on, I'll kind of talk broadly. At the national level, Actually, about 2 years ago now, there was a new transportation bill in place, and actually within that transportation bill, there's dedicated freight funding. It's not new money, but it's money that we normally would get as state DOTs and TxDOT, and we have $100 million a year dedicated to freight funding within Texas. So we have to identify, one, the freight network, the key corridors, and then two is we have to identify projects on those corridors and we submit them. So that's one way. It's still a drop in the bucket in terms of the needs. I'll tell you the freight plan that Bill just mentioned, we've identified about $65 billion worth of freight-centric projects, and $40 billion of that is unfunded right now. So we have a lot of needs, but there's not enough funding.
And you did say 65 billion with
yes,
a B.
With a B.
And you said 40 billion
is unfunded.
Is unfunded.
Yeah, so you can see more than 50% of the needs that we've identified for freight in the state of Texas is bigger than the funding available from both federal and state level. So as I mentioned earlier, the funding has to be, again, the regional level has to step in, locals have to step in, and then private sector, so it has to be a combination of that, to address freight needs. And then also, as Bill mentioned, to have projects ready so that when the grant opportunity, this region actually did well with the Tiger Grant program, and then now the Infra grant program, which is fairly freight-centric, to be able to draw down on those. If we can get federal grants, that actually frees up some of the monies we have, and we can use those on other projects, but we can't do that if we don't have projects ready to be submitted for those grant applications. So the funding is challenging. It's a multi-pronged approach, but I think the key is we need to prioritize the projects better and address the most critical needs on the most critical freight corridors.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Well, we've got our last few minutes. We're winding down here. Does anyone else on the panel have anything they would like to say?
If I may, let me follow up on what she was saying. Texas, we're told that Texas is one of 2 states, and Texas mainly, that is a donor state to the highway fund. Now, folks, something's wrong with that picture. We should be, Texas is such an economic workhorse, we should be getting more of that money back for exactly what you're talking about. So we've got 4 appropriators in the Texas delegation on the Appropriations Committee, and we're making this case to them every single time I see them, not just for coastal barrier protection, but the fact that Texas is such an economic workhorse, we should be getting more of that money back. So stay tuned. We're hoping that if the president does come out with an infrastructure bill, and we're hoping he does, and we want to all get behind that, that maybe some of those things Caroline's talking about, we can get in behind. But I want to make sure that Texas gets our fair share of the money, and that's something that we've not, in my estimation, not been getting. So we're hoping to be able to change that in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you. So I think if we just wrap up, here's what I'm hearing. We need a lot of cooperation. We need a plan. We've got these challenges, and they're not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, I would say we are very blessed in our region to have the economy that we have, and it's continuing to grow. We need to continue to make our voices heard in the area for both the state funding and the regional funding, and keep working together, which I think through Harvey we've proved that's one of the things that we do best here. Thank you guys, each one of you, very much for being part of this conversation, and just look forward to continuing to work with you for transportation solutions. Thank you.